it's a hard sell to get someone to go work hard manual labor in the agricultural sector.
So yes and no, right? You can get anybody to do anything if you pay an appropriate wage.
Sure.
Right? There are people who are climbing into sewer pipes who are okay with it because they're being paid an appropriate wage.
Mm-hmm.
But what happens with these low-wage jobs is, and with any job really, and the reason why they're bringing those immigrants is because the way that you hold wages down is by having a reserve army of labor. So you've got the people who are working, and capitalism relies on having a certain portion of the public who are unemployed and willing and looking for work, because then the employer holds more cards because they're able to say, well, if you're not willing to do it for this wage, I'll find someone who will do it for cheaper. And
Right.
by having the temporary foreign worker program, there is functionally a limitless base of that reserve army of labor. Because if you are not willing to go flip burgers for $15 an hour, then they will find somebody who is. They'll import somebody who is, rather than raising those wages. Because if you're able to bring in temporary foreign workers or immigrants to fill those positions, you don't need to properly recruit. You don't need to improve working conditions. You don't need to improve wages. You can just grab people. You can just bring in people and keep that cycle of labor exploitation going. Because think about what would happen to wages if there was 0% unemployment, right? If there was nobody looking for work, you would be able to negotiate pretty much whatever you wanted because the employer couldn't look elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
But if the employer can just always look elsewhere, they can always hold wages down. And so that's how you wind up with mass immigration, and not mass immigration, that's a bad way to phrase it, but large-scale immigration, while at the same time seeing 7% unemployment, where you're still seeing 1.6 million unemployed Canadians. It's because there's that differential between, people who are not able or willing to take that wage and importing people who are. So like, if you have somebody, like a really common situation is somebody decides that the wage that they're going to make just isn't worth going into work, and they would be more productive staying at home providing childcare or staying at home and running the household or whatever it may be. And so they get removed from the labor pool just because that job isn't going to cover their costs or it isn't going to be worth it for them to take it. And so it's just created this situation where everybody loses except employers. Rant complete.
I just wanted to specify, like, there's specific types of immigration. So, like, the temporary foreign worker program is very specific as opposed to just general immigration. But there's a lot of factors that come into play now. I mean, certainly wages are a big issue. There are people that, do believe that, well, if staying home is better than paying $2,000 for childcare, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, it makes sense to them to do that. But also, like, back in the day, like, you had more full-time positions. I know we just saw a cut of part-times, but there were more full-time positions which would allow people to be able to, I guess, make a living. Now there's not a lot of full-time positions for people. And so you've got people working multiple jobs at part-time positions. Those part-time positions then get taken away from, let's say, the high school students, right? Because when you have people that can work multiple or various different shifts, they're more desirable, I think, to employers than people who can only work from like 5 to 10 p.m. at night, right?
Sure.
And I think that's what makes it difficult for youth to acquire positions. There's also not the same amount of entry-level type positions for people anymore. So I think there's a lot that contributes to it. I don't think it's just as simple as, people don't want to do the jobs, and so they're just not working by choice.
Mm-hmm.
I think for some, that's the problem. But yeah, I mean, I think we need to take a look at the temporary foreign worker program when we have such high unemployment in Canada, even in Alberta, even though Danielle Smith says it's, everybody come here. But yeah, I think that's the sort of thing where we need to keep an eye on. The government needs to keep an eye on it, and then proactively make decisions, right? Instead of reactively now having to make decisions as per C2.
Well, and I think it's important to recognize that the issue isn't the immigrants. The issue is the exploitation of immigrants.
Yes.
The issue is the system of exploitation that they are being sort of fed into in order to keep wages down, keep costs low for employers. It's all just an economic house of cards that, like I said, leaves everybody getting screwed except the employers.
Well, and it's the capitalistic approach, right? So like if you as an employer can bring in people and you get a subsidy for doing that and you're getting this labor, but nobody's checking up on it once you've been approved, that is part of the problem. And we saw it, I'm sure it's still happening, but we saw it, in grand numbers a few years ago where you have these groups of temporary foreign workers that are being housed in the back rooms of, the KFC, or they're all sharing one hotel room because it's cheaper for the employer. Like, that's the problem. Like, you can create a program, but you can't just let this program, you can't bet on people doing what's right and not have oversight into a program that you're creating and now come back and say it's a problem, right?
Especially when somebody's employment or when somebody's immigration status is tied to their employment,
Yes.
they are way less likely to stand up to unfair employment practices. They are way less likely to speak up because they don't want to get deported.
Yeah.
In addition to that, I mean, I think the immigrant workers is a really good point to bring up, and the conditions are deplorable. And we have a lot of migrant workers here in agricultural areas around where I live, and they live on site. It's terrible. It's like dormitory. It's worse than dormitory style accommodation. And they do it, and they make the money, and they send the money. They take as much money as they can back home at the end of the season. There's two things that come to mind, and one is, have we kind of painted ourselves into a corner? Because I know that you, Steve, had said that people pay people enough, and they'll go into that sewage pipe and do what you need to do. And I think you're right to an extent, but I think even if they increase wages for migrant workers on farms to $20 an hour, I think it'd be hard pressed to find enough non-migrant workers, people who didn't have enough skin in the game for exactly all the terrible aspects of having your immigration status tied to your employment. That's a very powerful way for you to be like, yes, I will do. This is a convincing factor. I will do this job. Sure, absolutely, I'm going to do this job. If you're just some kid, are you going to be as eager to do that? If you're like, I don't need to get a job. I'm not saying people are lazy. I'm not saying they're not looking for jobs, but meaning if you had a choice, if we painted ourselves into a corner of luxury and decadence and the idea that like, we don't have to do those jobs.
I mean, yes and no.